Hi, it's Kirby Summers, and this is the Epstein Project podcast. I am going to follow up on my podcast of yesterday. So many of you left incredible responses that I felt that I needed to sort of follow up with additional information. Before I start, I want to thank you again for your amazing support. Please like the video. Please subscribe. So someone left an interesting question that I get all the time. And that is, oh, well, I know about the Franklin child abuse allegations slash scandal slash cover up. I know about Jeffrey Epstein. I want to know about others. My and it surprises me that I guess I have not made my point as clearly as perhaps I thought I was making my point. They're all the same. Okay, there is no difference from what I have been able to determine between the Franklin, which happened in the 80s, or the Epstein, which you became aware of, I suppose, within the last maybe 15 years. Some of you, maybe some of you know about it a little bit longer, and some of you only recently discovered this. It's all part of the same thing. So that, for example, the Mark Dutroux case, same. The Finders, the same. Craig Spence, the same. I brought in the Hollywood connection yesterday because I wanted to show that with Hollywood as an arm of the intelligence services, that they are able to then promote something like, let's say, Boys Town, which is a perfect example. Boys Town is the location in Omaha, Nebraska, where many of the children were lured. And I don't know if many of you knew that there was a movie made in 1938 by MGM. They suddenly decided they needed to create a movie about Boys Town. Boys Town, to give you just a sort of a summary, because I don't want to make this a very long podcast. It was founded in 1917 by a Catholic priest named Edward Joseph Flanagan. What's interesting about Flanagan is he was invited by the War Department to travel to Ireland. We know what happened in Ireland. We have Jimmy Savile, right? Or Jimmy Savile, or I guess you'll tell me what's the best way to pronounce his name. And then he traveled to Ireland to help General MacArthur with children issues during World War II. He did this for the War Department. The way history goes, he founded a shelter in 1917 in Omaha, Nebraska for unemployed men. And then he expanded it in 1921 as a home for homeless boys, and it became known as Boys Town. I mean, it's literally a very large place, right? So it's got its own schools, it's got its own churches, more than one. It's got cottages, it's got a gym, it's got its own post office. Imagine it's got its own post office. So even if the kid that's in this Boys Town is sending out a letter, you can be sure that letter is being read. Okay, so again, it's like being in a like being in a prison. The boys were ages between 10 and 16. I I think that I have discussed that Charles Manson was transferred to Boys Town when he was 14. He stayed only for 2 weeks. He had been in another similar place, and I have a feeling they're all connected to intelligence. And so the reason that I think that MGM decided to make a movie about Boys Town in 1938, starring Spencer Tracy, playing the role of Father Flanagan, and Mickey Rooney, who was a child actor, and he continued acting, I think, for 70 years. I mean, he's like literally somebody who's had the longest running career in the history of Hollywood. So he's an insider, and he became one of the most popular actors of the time and continued making movies forever. So that Hollywood goes in there. And in fact, I remember watching reruns of this film, Boys Town, when I was a kid. And it always struck me as an odd thing that at the end of the film, there was always the address for Boys Town, because it never moved. It's still in Omaha, Nebraska, with send your money here, send your money here. So I don't know if the public knows, if you know, for example, that they were always, whenever they had reruns on TV, right, they're asking for money. And it was going theoretically to this Father Flanagan so he can run this place for homeless boys. What struck me as odd, obviously, and what makes me suspect that it's an arm of the intelligence agencies like Southern Air Transport, is that, it's the War Department that requested that Father Flanagan travel more than once. He did this more than once during the time that he was at Boys Town, to go abroad. In fact, he died abroad. He had, quote, a heart attack. To go abroad for child issues. Not only that, it wasn't just that he did it for the military, but he had a direct connection to President Harry Truman. Who else had a direct connection to President Ronald Reagan? Lawrence King, right? Larry King had a direct connection. And if you haven't read it, you will be reading it. I have it in my new book, Creating Epstein, Bill Barr, Leslie Wexner, and the CIA. You can pre-order it. I'm not sending it out yet because I want to get all my information in there. So I've paused the sale of that. And also all of my new drops, all of my new research ends up in my Epstein Project newsletter, and I'll put a link to that underneath. So, when people ask, well, I want to know about another one. Well, they're all the same. So, for example, in my book, Ghislaine Maxwell, an Unauthorized Biography, my last chapter, I devoted to Karen Mulder. And, she was a beautiful teenager. She had long blonde hair. She was 5'10". She lived in Holland. And she ended up being, in 1985, her parents took her and her younger sister, Saskia. Remember, sisters are a big deal. All right. So siblings are a big deal, which is why I sort of reached into the Ira Levin connection. And he does have a book, A Kiss Before Dying, where he basically seduces three sisters, killing the one after the other. But sisters are important. And if you know about the Epstein situation and you know about the Franklin situation, and again, I want to make sure that you understand they are part of the same animal, that sisters are a recurring theme. Okay. So her parents for Karen Mulder, they took her on a trip in 1985 to the south of France. And that's where she first saw an ad for Elite Model Management. So Elite, obviously, you know that name. It was in 1972, Elite Model Management was founded by John Casablancas. So John Casablancas, again, we have a Donald Trump connection because his daughter Ivanka became a very young model for John Casablancas, who was known to favor teenage girls. So we have the same thing happening over and over and over and over again. And people keep thinking that they're separate. No, they're all part of the same trafficking ring. Okay, so I'm just going to stay on Karen Mulder for a second. In Ghislaine Maxwell, an Unauthorized Biography, I show how the worlds of Karen Mulder, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Jeffrey Epstein collided, right? So they were part of the same world. In fact, the very first trip that Ghislaine and Epstein went on together, as soon as they began working together, which is right after her father died, was they went to Paris. And I write about this in my book. And who's on the runway? Karen Mulder. In 2001, and Karen Mulder, by the way, achieved a lot of fame. She was one of the supermodels, along with, I'm blanking out on the name of the model that Virginia Giuffre is on. She's gone to her birthday party with Ghislaine and Jeffrey, and that's pretty much, she's introduced to Prince Andrew. So, but you know who I'm talking about. So she's part of that world, and there are a lot of pictures of them together. But in any event, in 2001, she was being interviewed on a French television show, and she basically just let it rip. She told the executives that were sitting with her on the stage, she said that she had been raped by the people that ran the modeling agency, that she had been a gift to Prince Albert of Monaco, that she had been coerced into having inappropriate relationships in order to get a better contract, that they had used her and other models as a sex slave in a trafficking ring that extended up and down throughout the French society, and it implicated politicians, members of the police, and top officials. She also said that her father had raped her. Okay, and in yesterday's conversation with you, it's a monologue, but I'm really having a conversation with you. I talked about the fact that Michel Imriclis made a film with his teenage bride, Pia Zadora, and it's called Butterfly, and it's about a father having an incestuous relationship with his daughter, who's a teenager, portrayed by Pia Zadora. So this is how the film industry sort of seeps in here. It did with Boys Town to make it look legit, right? But it's like a Southern Air Transport situation. It's sort of like just a middle person, but Hollywood is definitely an arm. So the executives of the French television show kind of freaked out, and they never showed that segment. In fact, they did not allow anyone to leave the television station without making sure that they hadn't taken a tape recorder or pictures, just to make sure that word would not get out. Once she made it back to her apartment, her sister, okay, because if you need the sisters for many, many reasons, which I'll go into at another time. Her sister arrives, and then against Karen Mulder's will, she puts her into a psychiatric unit in a hospital in Paris, where she's heavily sedated for 5 months. Okay. She's under the auspices that they are treating her for depression and anxiety. All right. Gerald Marie, who was then the head of the elite Paris division, and one of the men who she accused of raping her, paid the bill. Now, Gerard Marie, as you know, is connected to Jean-Luc Brunel, who was just recently found of having, quote, committed suicide in his cell in Paris. It, so that what happened to Karen Mulder and the ring that she was connected to, and there are photographs of her with Prince Albert of Monaco. And by the way, she said it was just a front because he liked people of the same gender, if you will. And we've obviously heard about Virginia Giuffre's situation with Prince Andrew and other people that she has named. So that this is all part of the same thing. So when I just want to circle back to what happened with Father Flanagan, he in 1948, at the age of 61, once again was called upon by the War Department to go help with children's affairs. He was, I think at that point, he went to Japan and Korea. Okay. And while he was in Berlin, so he went to Japan, Korea, Berlin. Apparently, he was making stops in a lot of different places on behalf of the United States War Department. He had a heart attack at the age of 61. I have to think that that was an induced heart attack, because at 61, you're still kind of young, and he was actually well enough to go on the trip. However, his remains were returned to Nebraska on a military plane, and he had a very lavish funeral. After the funeral, President Truman flew to Nebraska and placed a very elaborate memorial, a wreath, very elaborate, on his tomb. And it read, "All for the honor and glory of God." And so the military connection, the connection with the presidents, the connections of Epstein to, the prime ministers of Israel, along with Ghislaine Maxwell, these are all, they're all tentacles of the same animal or the same thing. I just want to explain that before the Central Intelligence Agency was created in 1947, it was preceded by the Office of Strategic Services, which was created in 1942. Before that, the United States depended on its armed forces. So they depended on the Air Force and the Navy for their intelligence operations. And as I have explained in my books, in my newsletters, on podcasts, the CIA was exposed in 1974 for the atrocities of the MK Ultra program. The MK Ultra program, it's mind control, but it has many aspects to this. This is literally the biggest cover-up in the history of the United States, the biggest one. It's not Watergate. It's not Apollo 11. It's not anything else. It's not the Jeffrey Epstein case, although this has the potential to out it as it's doing now. It is the ongoing use of mind control against all of us. So with that said, I'm going to ask you again to like the video and, follow me on Twitter. Leave your questions and comments below because I do read them. Sometimes if it's a very long one, it takes me a couple of days to get to it, but I eventually read everything. And just a heads up, I will be doing another sit down with the insightful and incredibly curious Professor Hamamoto. And so I guess he and I will be giving you a heads up as to when you can listen to that. Okay, have a good day. Thank you for everything. Bye.